A lot of people may not know this, but at the beginning, Congress, the First Continental Congress, to forge the birth of our nation, started at its inception in 1774 with a prayer to God, to Jesus, to guide them, this country. The purpose of the First Continental Congress in 1774 was to coordinate a unified response to British oppression of the American colonies, to address what was called the Intolerable Acts, legislation passed by the British Parliament to further take freedom away from American citizens by rescinding the Massachusetts Charter, closing the port of Boston, among other things. The Chaplain Jacob Duché was asked by the members of the First Continental Congress on September 7, 1774, to open it with a prayer, the first part of which is below. At that time, the leaders of this nation still thought it was important to ask for Jesus Christ's help in governing this nation. Contrast that with our time where God has been kicked out of the public schools in 1962 and out of the courts and the public square, something the forefathers never intended. Contrast then with today and ask yourself, is America better off for it? Here is the first prayer in Congress. O Lord, our heavenly Father, high and mighty King of kings, and Lord of lords, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers on earth, and reignest with power supreme and uncontrolled over all the kingdoms, empires, and governments, look down in mercy. We beseech thee on these our American states who have fled to thee from the rod of the oppressor and thrown themselves on thy gracious protection, desiring to be henceforth dependent only on thee. You see, Americans then were losing their freedom, like we are today. Yet too many don't realize it, because they have been indoctrinated through no fault of their own by the school system, getting their news from social media and consumer culture to chase the next thing or meaningless trinket put in front of them by multinational corporations who ship their jobs overseas, pay the actors to hook them on the next fad, break up the family, push Agenda 21, to one day move them to human settlement zones in the cities while the elites, top 1%, have freedom to enjoy wilderness areas and the rest of the planet as they wish. You see, for the last 100 years or so, beginning with John Dewey and others, education has had a behavioral component added to it. So that like the proverbial frog in lukewarm water not realizing he is boiling to death as the temperature is gradually increased, products of the education system don't realize the degree of their servitude is increasing, and as Aldous Huxley says, have been taught to rather enjoy their servitude, as the proverbial temperature is slowly being increased, so that people don't realize their freedoms are being taken away imperceptibly, but incrementally, so that one day in the not-too-distant future, freedom of speech will be gone, and when it goes, all the other freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution and Bill of Rights will fall like dominoes. But unfortunately, people will swipe away from messages like this one to direct their smartphone, basically propaganda device, to the next thing media celebrities shilling for the house tell them to put in their trough by corporations who are busy lobbying Congress to take away the freedoms of the average American. Scientists like Henry Greeley at Stanford are already working to create humans from skin samples, tissue samples, without the need for gametes, without the need for a mother and father, whose allegiance will be to the state, their god, the multinational corporation, top 1%, who have both horses in the race, and in so doing control the state. And you have global citizens who will take the mark of the beast for sex and a six-pack for the next meaningless trinket corporations put in front of them. You see, if people could really see that the corporation wants to be their god, that it is corporations who lobby government, that politicians answer to regardless of party, that got the laws made that have removed God from schools, the courts, and the public square, and are now trying to make reciting parts of the Bible a quote-unquote hate crime. If people could see that the reason corporations are doing this is that they are run by elites, top 1%, who are directing you away from God to them, and that over time the average citizen's life has gotten worse. Yet, it has never been a better time for corporations since the Citizens United Act of 2010. And if people realized that our forefathers counted on Jesus Christ for help instead of corporations, and that Jesus Christ answered this first prayer giving our forefathers and others victory over the British and freedom, I believe if people realized these things that there would be mass revival in America, and that people would again turn to God for help, And as Chronicles 7:14 says, in doing so, God would heal our land. If people who were taught in school and media that there are no universal or absolute truths saw through this lie and returned to the absolute truth of God, then revival would happen. But because too many have grown to love their servitude, corporations pull the levers of society. Because of this, people will not do what our forefathers did. They will not call on God's power, the power of Jesus Christ, for help. And so, because they have been systematically directed away from God, and they are falling for it, they, unlike our forefathers and the citizens in 1774, could ultimately lose what little freedom they have to the corporation, World Economic Forum, and other global organizations run by the elites, top 1%, and the principalities spoken of in Ephesians 6:12. They've been led away from God to worship the created thing instead of the Creator. We need a mass return to Jesus Christ in this and other countries before it is too late.